Hey everyone and welcome back. Have you ever been so broke, so far down on your luck, that you felt like the universe itself was actively conspiring against you? I'm talking about that pit in your stomach feeling of knowing you're one mechanical failure away from ruin. Well, for our hero Kaelen Vance, that moment wasn't a feeling, it was a fact. Stranded on a dead, salt-crusted moon called the Oceanic Graveyard, Kaelen was facing an impossible 12-hour trek to safety with only 8 hours of oxygen left. But right when he thought his luck was finally exhausted, he stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist. A colossal, ancient being trapped, chained, and glowing faintly in the corrosive mist. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about a man who specialized in fixing broken things suddenly finding his own broken purpose, wrapped up in the fate of a chained guardian. This one's wild. You're going to want to stick around for the whole thing. Kaelen Vance coughed a plume of recycled air into his helmet, the metallic tang of desperation stinging his throat. He'd been walking for 2 hours, and the only thing that had changed was the dwindling number on his wrist-mounted chronometer. 6 hours 5 minutes and 32 seconds. 6 hours and 5 minutes of life support remaining. His destination, the Citadel Spire, a faint, needle-thin point on the horizon, was still a 10-hour trek across the moon known grimly as the Oceanic Graveyard. If you were to look at Kaelen Vance, you wouldn't see a hero. You'd see a man in his mid-30s who looked like he'd been perpetually chased by bad luck and a collection agency. His specialty was exoarchaeology, the niche, dangerous practice of finding and reclaiming sophisticated pre-collapse bioengineering tech from failed colonies. But in reality he was a glorified scavenger, haunted by the kind of crushing, culturally universal debt that followed you across star systems like a shadow. He needed this last big score. He needed to find the rumored Genesis drive, inside the hull of the Odyssey, one of the colossal rusted dreadnoughts that made up the graveyard's skeletal landscape. He hadn't found the drive. He'd only found a catastrophic power surge that had fried the engine of his skiff, the second chance. Irony, Kaelen reflected, was a currency the universe never lacked. Nothing for it, Kale, he muttered to himself, using the nickname his late partner used to call him. He clutched the heavy, dented scanner unit his father had left him, a relic of an age when tools were built to last, not to be cheaply replaced. This old unit, capable of analyzing chemical signatures and structural weakness, had saved his skin more times than he cared to admit. It was reliable. Unlike almost everything else in his life, the environment of the graveyard was relentless. It wasn't just the freezing cold or the distance. It was the corrosive fog. It was less of a traditional fog and more of a low-hanging, slow-moving cloud of ionized moisture and salt particulates that ate through cheap alloys in minutes and left unprotected flesh screaming for hours. Its edge was visible now, a swirling, sickly green curtain advancing slowly from the west. If the fog caught him, his suit's patches wouldn't hold and the clock would speed up terrifyingly. He forced himself to stop thinking about the numbers and focus on the ground. The ground here was fascinatingly horrible. A flat, gray-white expanse of crystalline salt that stretched for miles, broken only by the silhouettes of the dead ships. The salt often hid sinkholes formed by subsurface brine streams. It was like walking on eggshells the size of a continent. He adjusted his trajectory, veering toward a cluster of particularly large, jagged wreckage. He wasn't hoping for salvage anymore. He was looking for a shielded alcove, a place to rest for 5 minutes and catch his breath without worrying about the wind sucking the remaining oxygen out of his tanks. That's when the vibration started. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the groan of the massive derelict ships. It was a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to originate from the salt flat beneath his boots. It felt less like a tremor and more like a massive organic heartbeat. Kaelen stopped dead, his fingers instinctively tightening on the old scanner unit. His heart rate spiked. This desolate moon was supposed to be geologically inert. Nothing this size should be moving. He brought the heavy scanner up and switched it from structural analysis to deep scan sonar. The screen, usually a static field of white noise here, exploded with a massive, irregular shape dominating the subterranean readouts. It was huge. Too huge to be an asteroid fragment or a buried ship. It was several hundred meters long, irregular, and warm. The thermal signature was faint but definitely there, radiating heat against the glacial cold. Kaelen felt that familiar surge of professional curiosity mixed with existential dread, the blend that had defined his career. He crept forward, his eyes scanning the horizon until he saw it. A strange, irregular mesa that had definitely not been on his old topographical maps. It rose out of the salt crust like a petrified tsunami wave. As he got closer he realized it wasn't rock. It was a fusion of organic matter and geological sedimentation. The shape was vaguely familiar, almost anatomical. Climbing the small rise, he peered over the edge. The vibration intensified and Kaelen stopped breathing entirely. The object wasn't on the salt flats. It was part of them. Stretching hundreds of meters into a deep, protected basin, a basin the corrosive fog rarely reached, was an entity of impossible scale. It looked like a vast creature, perhaps the source of the old dragon myths, but integrated with crystalline mineral growths that pulsed with a faint, inner light. Its long, serpentine body was mostly covered by sediment, but its head and torso were exposed, tilted upward as if in a silent scream. And that's when he saw the metallic structures. It wasn't buried. It was bound. Colossal crystalline cables, thicker than his own skiff, had been anchored deep into the salt bedrock and lashed around the creature's joints, torso, and neck. They were ancient, pulsing with faint, suppressed energy, the work of an unimaginably advanced race that had feared this thing enough to lock it down forever. It was beautiful and terrifying, a gigantic, silent testament to a forgotten war. He instinctively checked the scanner again. The organic signature was impossibly high. This was not a mechanical construct. It was alive, or at least dormant. And right where the most massive crystalline cable wrapped around its thorax, Kaelen saw something that made his blood run cold. An access port. A large, hexagonal indentation built into the crystal itself, and embedded within it, was a dense, specialized lock. His dad's old scanner unit, the very one Kaelen was holding, was capable of analyzing that exact type of pre-collapse crystalline security. This wasn't coincidence. This was fate, or maybe just the worst kind of cosmic joke. His mind raced. Lost things, broken things, things everyone else has given up on, his old motto. He was looking at the ultimate piece of forgotten potential, and he knew he had to get closer, even if it cost him the last 6 hours of his life. The moment Kaelen Vance's scanner touched the crystalline lock, the faint internal light of the structure flared from soft green to an angry, unstable violet. The massive creature, the chain guardian, twitched. Not a gentle ripple, but a profound, seismic shudder that sent Kaelen scrambling backward, scrambling for purchase on the slippery, salt-caked slope. The thrumming in the ground intensified, vibrating up his legs and into his core. It felt like the entire moon was taking a deep, ragged breath. Kaelen pressed himself against the jagged spine of the entity, heart hammering against the rigid plates of his suit. His internal chronometer flashed 5 hours 58 minutes and 11 seconds. 6 minutes lost to sheer shock. Logic, that unreliable ally, finally cut through the panic. This thing was trapped. Its movements, though massive, were severely restricted by the crystalline tethers. The very energy pulsing through the cables was likely what kept it dormant. But the data his old reliable scanner had spat out was mind-boggling. The lock was a bioharmonic dampener. Its sole purpose was to suppress the organic energy output of the entity it contained. It wasn't designed to kill, but to silence, to ensure this immense, ancient consciousness remained locked in an eternal twilight sleep. And the access port? It wasn't for opening the lock. It was for the original jailers to maintain the dampener, to feed it small bursts of energy to keep the suppression running. But it was ancient. It was failing. Kaelen brought the scanner up again, his hands steadier now. He ran a diagnostic on the lock's resonance frequency. The readings were unstable, cycling between near total suppression and alarming spikes of energy. If he left it, the dampener would eventually fail on its own. The Guardian would be free. And Kaelen Vance would be 10 hours away, lost in the corrosive fog, facing an unleashed, likely furious entity of unimaginable power. This seemed like the smart choice. Leave and hope for the best. But the thought was hollow. It was the same cynical logic that had defined his life. Cut your losses, run when things get tough, survive on scraps. That's how he ended up in debt. That's how he ended up stranded. He looked at the access port, noticing the intricate, almost microscopic carving around the edge, a series of symbols that looked like an ancient promise. He felt a profound sense of recognition, not of the script, but of the situation. This was a giant, chained version of himself. Given up on by everyone, locked down by an impossible debt, slowly expiring. The dampener, Kaelen realized, was using residual energy to cycle. If he could introduce a counter-frequency, a precise, low-energy pulse, he could confuse the failing lock, forcing it to release its hold. It wouldn't require a cutting torch or massive power, just precision. And precision was what his salvaged, beat-up gear was all about. It was about finding the value in old tools, about respecting the complex engineering that came before. "All right, Veridian," Kaelen whispered, using the name he'd assigned the entity. It felt right, like describing something green and powerful trying to break through rock. Let's see if I'm as good at fixing potential as I claim to be. He opened the multi-tool panel on his wrist, carefully bypassing the safety protocols. He fed the resonance data from the scanner into the multi-tool and began coding a pulse sequence. This wasn't hacking, which was about brute force. This was surgical, like picking a complex mechanical lock. It was tedious, nerve-wracking work, requiring him to use every bit of knowledge gleaned from his years rummaging through forgotten pre-collapse archives. The slightest error, the wrong frequency, and the lock wouldn't just stay locked. It might overload the entire system, turning the basin into a lethal energy field. His hands, stiff with cold, worked meticulously. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The clock ticked down, 5 hours and 40 minutes. The corrosive fog was creeping closer, its green tendrils visible at the lip of the protective basin. He heard the faint sizzle of salt being eaten away by the acid. He had to be quick. Finally the code was ready. Kaelen inhaled deeply, holding his breath. He aimed the tip of his old scanner into the hexagonal port, the heavy unit fitting perfectly into the indentation, another strange echo of fate. He activated the coded sequence. A soft, almost musical chime echoed in the vast basin. The violet light surrounding the lock blinked, hesitated, and then vanished. The crystalline cables, once taut and humming, went dark, losing their repressive tension. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. The world was silent again, save for the faint hiss of his own oxygen recycler. Then the ground stopped thrumming. The immense, organic structure beneath him began to move. Not violently but slowly, deliberately, like a mountain waking up. The ancient bonds around its throat and limbs crumbled into glittering dust, instantly oxidized by the sudden release of energy. The entity's massive head, previously frozen in its posture of silent agony, slowly lowered, then lifted, turning toward Kaelen, who was pressed flat against its flank, suddenly feeling impossibly small. He had freed a god, and his life support had 4 hours left. The sound wasn't a roar. It was a deep, resonant sigh. A sound that carried the weight of millennia and echoed Kaelen's own exhaustion. The colossal head of Veridian, the chain guardian, dipped closer. Kaelen, pinned by the realization of his audacity, could feel the heat radiating off its massive form, a warmth that countered the moon's brutal cold, but did nothing to calm his terror. His suit's external microphone crackled faintly as the entity moved. Kaelen squeezed his eyes shut for a terrifying second, waiting for the devastating swipe, the cleansing fire, the sudden violent end to his debt-ridden existence. He'd just freed an ancient, cosmic horror. What else could he expect? But when nothing happened, he cautiously opened his eyes. Veridian wasn't attacking. It was studying him. Its enormous eyes, the size of Kaelen's torso and glowing with an unsettling, intelligent emerald light, narrowed as they focused on the insignificant figure pressed against its flank. The creature's scales, which looked like polished, dark granite mixed with glowing moss, shifted, giving off a soft, ethereal luminescence that briefly pushed back the creeping corrosive fog. Then a sound. Not the deep sigh from before, but a noise that felt more deliberate, focused directly at Kaelen. It resonated through his suit's comms, a low, guttural vibration that somehow formed a thought in his mind, though no language was spoken. The small thing. What? The voice, or rather, the mental projection of a voice, was overwhelming. A library of ancient knowledge compressed into a single, simple query. Kaelen stumbled backward, clutching his head, fighting the sudden psychic pressure. It felt like standing too close to a hyperspace engine. Whoa. Back off. Kaelen yelled, his voice thin and panicked in the helmet. He raised his hands in a universal gesture of surrender. I was just fixing the lock. No harm, no foul. I'm leaving. He took a desperate step towards the lip of the basin, toward the safety of the wide-open, dangerous salt flats and freedom. But the massive head moved with a startling, fluid speed, blocking his exit. Veridian wasn't being aggressive, it was being curious. You brought the counter-frequency. The jailers never came back. They chose containment over maintenance. They chose silence. But you chose restoration. The projection was clearer this time, slower, allowing Kaelen's mind to process the profound weight of the words. It felt less like being yelled at and more like being read a very old, very heavy history book. Kaelen tried to rationalize, to diminish his own altruism, the core impulse he was always too cynical to admit to. Look, I didn't choose anything. I saw a failing system and I had the old tech to fix it. That's my job. I find lost things and I get them working again. I'm an exoarchaeologist, a bio-scavenger. I just needed to test the scanner's full range. You were a good test subject. He stopped talking, realizing how pathetic his denial sounded next to the creature he'd just freed. He looked down at his life support chronometer, 5 hours and 15 minutes. The corrosive fog was now slithering into the basin, the acid sizzle unmistakable. He was trapped between an ancient being and a lethal environmental hazard. You lie to yourself, small one. Your heartbeat quickens when you use the term restoration. Your mind holds fear, yes, but also pride for the action taken. Veridian's massive snout tilted further down, closer to Kaelen's helmet. Its breath, when it came, wasn't hot fire, but a cool, mineral-rich steam that carried the faint scent of ozone and ancient earth. You seek to restore your own potential, do you not? You are bound by chains of debt, of past failures, of the fear of abandonment. Kaelen felt a rush of blood to his head. It was one thing to be judged by other people. It was another to have his entire life catalogued and analyzed by a cosmic-scale entity he just met. The cultural shame of his crippling debt, the thing that drove every desperate, stupid decision, felt suddenly exposed and raw. That's personal. Kaelen protested, feeling a flash of defensive anger. You don't know anything about me, or my life, or what I need to survive. Veridian was silent for a long moment, simply observing Kaelen with those brilliant emerald eyes. Then its head moved slightly, indicating the growing haze of the corrosive fog at the rim of the basin. Survival. The fog comes. I sense your lack of time. You came here seeking a drive, the Genesis drive they called it, buried in the corpse ship, Odyssey. You failed. Now you have 4 hours and 10 hours of walking. Kaelen felt his throat tighten. The creature had known exactly where he'd been and what he'd been seeking. It knew the truth about his failure. There was no hiding. He slumped, leaning heavily against the cool mineral scale of the creature. Yeah, Kaelen sighed, the air escaping his suit regulator. I failed. I'm a wreck. I'm just like the rest of the junk I try to fix. But I didn't leave you. I saw the potential. I saw something that deserved a second chance even if I don't. And in that moment of raw honesty, the massive entity did something entirely unexpected. It shifted its focus from Kaelen's mind to the lock he had just disabled. Potential. The word echoed in Kaelen's mind, a slow, deliberate translation of an ancient concept. Veridian was testing the sound, the meaning. Finding lost systems. Restoring broken purpose. Giving things everyone else has abandoned a second chance. Veridian turned its gaze back to Kaelen, and a profound sense of warmth, almost like approval, washed over his mind. Does that sound familiar, little one? The weight of Veridian's question, does that sound familiar, little one? Pressed down on Kaelen, forcing him to confront the genuine, unselfish impulse that lay beneath his mountain of cynicism. He realized that this colossal, ancient creature wasn't judging his debt, it was simply reflecting his purpose back at him. Kaelen had spent his life finding value in discarded objects, and now he was faced with the ultimate discarded entity. He pushed off the creature's flank, straightening his posture, realizing he needed to treat this not as a confrontation, but as an impossible business negotiation. It sounds like a job description, Kaelen replied, his voice regaining some of its professional snap, though it trembled slightly. He checked his clock, 4 hours and 55 minutes. A job I'm currently failing because I'm stranded 10 hours from the nearest settlement, and the corrosive fog is about to melt my suit. So here's the reality, Veridian. I freed you. That's my payment. Now, I need to get to the Citadel Spire and I need to do it fast. Veridian's massive head remained still, its emerald eyes assessing him. The silence was not empty, it was filled with the churning of vast, ancient thought. The Citadel Spire. A place of fragile, flickering life. And a prison of a different sort, designed by those who still fear what they do not comprehend. You wish to trade an impossible freedom for simple passage. I'm not trading freedom, Kaelen countered quickly, stepping back a pace. I merely restored the system to its natural function. I didn't own the lock, so I don't own the key. I only ask for cooperation. I can't walk out of here alive, and you look pretty massive. You move faster than I do. Besides, Kaelen added, trying to appeal to the creature's now proven intelligence, you're newly released. You need a guide who knows the pitfalls of this moon, the patrols, the new traps that the jailers might have installed in the last few millennia. This was the risky play, the cultural element Kaelen understood. Karma and mutual benefit. If he gave something genuinely valuable without expectation, he might receive something equally valuable in return. He had given Veridian a second chance. Now he had to rely on that principle being returned. A guide, Veridian projected, the mental voice laced with a curiosity that sounded almost childlike despite its age. Yes, the world has changed. The atmosphere smells of cheap metal and desperation now, not the cold, pure vacuum of the collapse era. A guide would be useful. The giant head dipped again and Kaelen braced himself, but this time, the creature gently nudged its snout towards a heavily sedimented area near its foreleg. But you are a restorer of things. Your knowledge has value beyond mere guidance. You said you failed to find the Genesis drive. That drive is here. It lies in the core of my containment chamber. It was the power source of the original dampener, the ultimate power source they feared I would claim. Kaelen felt a rush of adrenaline so strong it almost buckled his knees. The Genesis drive. The legendary, impossibly valuable power source that could clear his debt tenfold. He'd spent years searching for a myth, and it was sitting right here, underneath the entity he just freed. You know where it is? Kaelen stammered. And you'd give it to me? It is a broken thing, Veridian stated simply, a system designed only for containment. But it is potential and you are its restorer. You broke the lock and therefore you inherit the spoils of the prison. Take the power source. It is yours. But the exchange is simple. You lead me from this graveyard to the edge of the known system, beyond the reach of the Citadel's fragile gaze. You will teach me the survival of this new era. Kaelen quickly ran the calculation in his head. An hour to retrieve the drive, 2 hours to get out of the basin using Veridian speed, and maybe 5 hours of assisted travel to the Citadel, where he could quickly secure his prize and transfer to a transport. He still had enough oxygen. It was insanely dangerous, but the reward was the clean slate, the fresh start, the second chance he'd been chasing for a decade. It's a deal, Kaelen agreed, his voice firm. But we move now. The fog is in the basin. Veridian gave a massive, slow nod. The movement was powerful yet careful, as if the creature was relearning how to use its own colossal body. Kaelen climbed onto the creature's broad shoulder, finding a handhold where one of the crystalline cables had once been anchored. The surface was warm, alive, and surprisingly comfortable. Veridian. That is the name you gave me. It resonates. Veridian, Kaelen repeated, settling in. And I'm Kaelen. Let's get that drive and let's get moving. The creature lowered its immense head, creating a path through the sediment with surprising grace, revealing the access point to the hollow chamber where the core of the dampener lay. Kaelen, holding his old scanner like a magic wand, dropped down into the dark opening, ready to claim the ultimate salvage. For the first time in years, Kaelen Vance felt less like a failure running from debt and more like a pivotal player in a story too big to fail. Kaelen dropped back onto Veridian's shoulder, the weight of the Genesis drive, a shimmering fist-sized sphere of contained energy, a solid, comforting pressure against his chest plate. He hadn't just acquired an object, he'd acquired the future. His debt was gone. His second chance was secured. But the exhilaration was quickly cut short by the sight of the corrosive fog, which now fully blanketed the basin floor, sizzling malevolently against the salt. It's bad, Veridian, Kaelen transmitted, his voice urgent. We need speed. The Citadel is that spire, the tallest thing on the horizon. Can you move that fast? Movement requires learning, Veridian projected, the thought steady and calm despite the acid mist swirling around its massive feet. I have been still for a long age. But necessity is the greatest teacher. With a mighty, earth-shaking effort, Veridian rose fully from the sediment. The ground cracked beneath its tremendous weight, but the entity moved with a sudden, surprising grace. It extended its serpentine body, not flying but gliding across the salt flats like a colossal living hovercraft, held aloft by some combination of raw bioenergy and low gravity. The speed was dizzying. Kaelen had to cling tightly to the creature's mossy scale, his body pressed flat against the wind. The journey was a blur of hostile beauty. They bypassed the treacherous, brine-filled sinkholes that would have swallowed Kaelen whole. They ignored the colossal, rusted dreadnoughts that Kaelen had spent his life scavenging. With Veridian, the graveyard was no longer a threat. It was simply a landscape to be traversed. As they flew, Kaelen, protected by the heat and energy radiating from his massive carrier, tried to communicate. He described the new galaxy, the rise of the massive credit corporations that held entire star systems hostage, the culture of disposal and planned obsolescence, the way people treated each other in the world, always chasing the new, throwing away the reparable. Veridian absorbed it all silently, processing the information with an almost philosophical detachment. The new jailers use invisible chains, the entity mused mentally. Despair. They force the small ones to run forever, seeking small scraps. Exactly, Kaelen confirmed, looking down at the gleaming Genesis drive clutched in his hand. I was running. Running from the debt. Running from the failure. That's why I was out here. Running is easy. Facing the problem is hard. The citadel's spire grew quickly on the horizon, transforming from a tiny needle into a massive angular structure bristling with defensive energy fields. It was a fortress designed to keep things out. As they approached, a localized warning siren blared from the citadel. Red spotlights swept the salt flats, instantly locking onto the impossible sight of the immense serpentine entity moving with speed across the desolate ground. "They see us," Veridian noted calmly. "They do," Kaelen replied, pulling out his old multi-tool. "They're going to open fire, but they won't stop you. They'll target me, the small easy target on your back. We need to part ways at the perimeter. The deal was to get you to the edge of the known system. I can get you past this moon's defense grid once I'm inside, but you can't get close." Veridian slowed its immense glide just outside the perimeter shield. The air crackled with defensive energy, and the thrum of power-charging weapons was audible even through Kaelen's suit. "Kaelen Vance." The projection was profound, a farewell and a promise. "You are a restorer of purpose. You have found mine and you have restored your own." "What exactly does restoration entail?" Kaelen asked, echoing Veridian's own earlier question. Veridian was silent for a moment, and Kaelen felt a surge of warmth, not heat but deep affection, flow into his mind. Finding lost things. Fixing broken things. Giving things everyone else has given up on a second chance. Veridian paused, then used Kaelen's chosen name for the entity with profound resonance. "Restoration of Kaelen and Veridian. Sounds good, does it not?" Kaelen laughed, a booming, genuine sound that echoed in his helmet. The laugh was light, free, and felt more real than any moment in the past decade. It was the laugh of a man who no longer owed anyone anything. "Yeah, Veridian. It sounds damn good." Kaelen slid down the creature's flank and landed on the cold salt crust. He looked up at the colossal, beautiful entity, no longer with fear but with genuine gratitude. He held out his hand, his small human work-worn hand. Veridian lowered its massive, scale-covered head, and Kaelen grasped its huge, surprisingly gentle snout. It was a bond between two unlikely partners, the indebted scavenger and the ancient god, both given a new life on the edge of the galactic map. As Kaelen turned and began his final, unhurried walk toward the Citadel's airlock, the Genesis drive heavy in his pocket, Veridian let out a single powerful sound that shook the moon. Not a roar of war but a vast, joyous, resounding laugh. Then, with a sudden surge of ancient power that overloaded the Citadel's scanners, Veridian launched into the sky, disappearing beyond the corrosive fog and into the blackness, leaving Kaelen Vance debt-free, with a clear path toward a future that felt, finally, utterly his own. He was no longer running from failure. He was walking toward restoration.